All right, good morning, Lakewood. Good morning. All right, hope everyone's having a good Christmas season. It's that time of year, right? About to celebrate Christ's birth. So, I've been asked to teach this quarter, and I wanted to start off with a question. What is the most important story in the Old Testament, or as I'm trying to call it, the First Testament, to make it not sound like it's old and useless and we can ignore it? So, what is the most important story in the Old Testament? The beginning, the creation story. That's pretty important, yeah? Yeah. I think there's a kind of the prediction of Christ coming. That's what the story has in it, yeah?
I think it's the fall.
The fall.
We wouldn't need Christ unless we had the fall.
Well, that's true. We wouldn't need Christ if we didn't have the fall. All right. Anyone else? I'm going to say it's Exodus itself. The Exodus story is the most important story in the Old Testament. It's the most important story to the Israelites. It is their foundation story of how they became a people. And that is what we are going to be studying this quarter, the book of Exodus. And the reason I say it's the most important story for the Israelites is how often it is referenced in Scripture. Look at this. Exodus, deliverance is cause for Hebrews' gratitude, for their gratitude. All those verses are telling the Israelites, you have to be thankful to God because he delivered you from Exodus, because he delivered you from bondage. He delivered you from slavery. All right, that is what this story is about. Don't even try. If you want to get all these verses, I'll give you my slides afterwards. There's too many verses to go over. We also said, knowledge of the Exodus is credited to others. People have heard about the Exodus story, and that has caused them to respect the Israelites and their God, right? And we got here marker, right? Nothing like this has happened since Exodus. You see this all the time in the Old Testament. It's always like the touchstone comparison for the Israelites. Like I said, it's such an important story that some might argue, why not just start the Bible with Exodus, but then why are the Israelites in Genesis, in Egypt, and why are they going to this promised land? So we need Genesis because it's all the setup. It does lay the important foundation. It explains where everything came from, right? So we need the foundation so we can tell this story. And this story is important to Christians, right? Because Exodus is the same metaphor for what Jesus does for us, right? He delivers us from the bondage of sin and death, just as the Israelites were delivered from the physical bondage of sin, or of slavery and death, right? So, as you know, I like to start with quotes. I like to set the stage for what we're going to read. So this is, John H. Walton said, a modern empiricist historian's response to ancient, especially Israelite, transcendent historiography might be, it has not provided information that is reliable since it's so full of deity. The ancient historian's response to the modern empiricist historiography might be, it has not provided information that is worthwhile since it's so empty of deity. The ancient people saw God's work in everything, right? Everything was because of God. And this is why modern historians like to discount the Bible, because it attributes everything to God. And that has led to what we call the minimalists and the maximalists. Anyone ever heard this term before about Old Testament history, minimalist and maximalist? So, the minimalists say you can't use the Bible to prove anything. It is unreliable. We can only prove what we dig up in the ground. That's the only reliable thing. Bible, not reliable. Every ancient other document, totally reliable. Not the Bible, though. Yes. Maximalists are like, we have the Bible. Let's use the Bible, right? And so they tend to be looked down upon because, they're Christians or Orthodox Jews, who take this stuff seriously, right? As we're going to take this seriously. So we'll be covering Exodus this week. We'll be covering very little of it because we got a lot of background to go over. But, the key theme here is Joseph is forgotten, right? Joseph was a big figure in Egypt once upon a time. He was the vizier. He was the second most powerful man in the land. But he gets forgotten. It's been 400 years. So here's my bibliography. Victor P. Hamilton's Exodus and Exegetical Commentary. That is my main commentary and whose translation I'll be using to teach from. The books by John Walton I would especially recommend reading. They really help you to understand how the ancient people thought about things, including the Israelites. And also Kenneth A. Kitchen's On the Reliability of the Old Testament. You want a book that will argue the archaeology of the Old Testament faithfully, that attacks like the documentary hypothesis that says, Moses didn't write the Torah and it's just a bunch of random documents that were assembled like in 500 BC. He has good arguments against that. So our objective this week is, of course, to learn the background of Exodus, to understand the importance of this story in the Bible, and to remember God acts in his own time, not ours. Because they've been in Egypt for 400 years, right? God said you're going to have Canaan. That was 400 years ago. They've been living in the land of Egypt for all this time. Why has God waited till now to act? So I think we've kind of already covered why the Exodus is so important. I meant to take this out of my slides, actually. But does anyone else have any other further comments about why you think the story of Exodus is important before we move on? Yeah. It shows God remembers his promises, yes. That is one of the main themes of Exodus. Yes, Dan?
God, until this point in time, has been dealing with each individual family as a central organizational unit. That's an example that Christendom has followed in some parts. There is also a value in having many families working together. And Exodus is where God begins building a nation.
Yeah.
You will show us that isn't going to be the solution, but it is a valuable stage for them to grow through.
Yeah, so Dan is talking about how before in Genesis, God was more like a family deity. He was just for Abraham, the patriarchs, right? But now there's a lot of families, a lot of Israelites, and they're now going to be going from a tribal group to an actual nation with God as their head, and it's a stepping stone in God's plan of redemption. We'll cover more of that next week. So here's a map of Egypt and Sinai. So these are major cities. P. Ramses and Pithom, these are important cities. So is Tanis. This is Goshen. That is where the Israelites settled at the end of Genesis. So Tanis, anyone ever watch Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes.
Tanis is where they dig up the Ark of the Covenant. It's in the delta, not a desert, so obviously they didn't get the location correctly. But it was one of the major capitals of Egypt. But we'll go over why it's important here in a minute. But so you can see the lay of the land. You have the delta to the north. You have lower Egypt to the south. The delta is upper Egypt, even though it's lower elevation. But there we go. So one of the major arguments you're going to get from the minimalists is there is no archaeological evidence of the Exodus. There is no archaeological evidence that the Israelites were in Egypt. And that's correct. We have nothing.
Yes.
Yet, we can always find something. Here's the deal, though. They're in the delta. The delta is a wide fan of mud and swamp. Every year, the Nile floods and deposits more mud. There's no source of stone in the delta, so everything up there was made of mud, or mud and wattle, or mud bricks. And these do not survive. That is part of the problem. All the archaeological evidence destroyed by the Nile. The stone for the few structures that were built had to be shipped up the Nile from the south, and they were recycled. So like the 18th dynasty monuments were reused by the Ramessides to build their temples up there. Then they were torn down and reused by the Saite, the Ptolemaic, Romano-Byzantine, even the Islam. In Islamic time they were doing this. So they destroy so much of what's up there. Less than 1% of papyri is believed to have survived. Small fragments. That's it, of their records, of the daily court records of the kings of Egypt at the time. The ones that we did survive, they're like burnt fragments that, because they got burnt, they didn't decay the same, I guess. I don't know, I didn't really get into the argument, but yeah, we don't have much. So this is not something to be worried about when someone says, there is no evidence, because there shouldn't be any evidence. The capital of Egypt was in the Delta during the time of the Exodus, and so again, the vast majority of the administrative records were lost. All we have are the monuments, right? And you know what? Pharaohs do not raise monuments to their failures. A group of slaves escaped and you will use a battalion of chariots chasing them. You're not making a monument to that. That might get recorded in the day records, but they're all lost, right? What we do know is that Semite people from Canaan did live in the Delta. During the Hyksos period, this is like 800 to 1500, they even ruled Egypt from the Delta. This is most likely the pharaoh that Joseph was the vizier for. So Hyksos just means foreigner, right? So these are foreign pharaohs that are in power. They are believed to mostly be Amorites, is their actual ethnicity, but they're from Canaan. They speak Semitic languages. They would have been seeing the Israelites as kin. Next, Egyptians didn't build monuments with slave labor, right? Anyone seen the Prince of Egypt animated movie? And they're like building the Great Pyramid with slave labor and all that stuff. That's a fiction. The pyramids were built with skilled paid labor. They didn't use slaves for that. That's also the Old Kingdom, right? This is before even Abraham's time, when all the pyramids were built. No one's building pyramids during the time of the Exodus. And then we get to the Middle Kingdom, which would be around the time of Abraham. Abraham would be probably towards the end of the Middle Kingdom. And then we see an increasing number of Canaanites settling into Egypt. They were slave tributes from local rulers, brought by merchants like Joseph was, prisoners of war, and immigration like the Israelites were. We see that they were domestic household slaves like Joseph. And they were not brick builders during this time, right? That's the other thing. We don't have record of them building bricks, right, during this time. But that's not, again, the time the Exodus takes place. The Exodus takes place during the New Kingdom period, which is from 1540 to 1170 BC. There, Egyptian kings are campaigning in Canaan and Syria. They're bringing back slaves. They use this manpower in a lot of ways, including making bricks, right? We find a mural in this Vizier Reckmeyer in 1450 that shows foreign slaves owned by Pharaoh building the temple of Amun in Karnak with mud brick slaves. And they are a mix of Semites and Nubians. And that's important, the Nubians. There is evidence that Nubians went with the Israelites in the Exodus, that there was more than just Israelites. There was other slave groups that did go with them. So here's that mural. You can see down here, they are making mud bricks, right? And how they're described in the Bible is accurate. We have the Louvre Leather Scroll, right? It's one of the few administrative documents we actually do have from this period. It's from the 5th year of Ramses II, 1275 BC. And it records that each Egyptian overseer had a target of making 2,000 bricks. My source didn't say if that was a day, a week, a month, I really don't know. They also had foreign foremen who worked beneath the Egyptian overseers to manage the slaves. And it references that straw is used to make the bricks, right? And we both see these sort of two-tier leadership in the Exodus story of the Egyptian overseer, Hebrew foremen, Hebrew slaves, right? So think of the Hebrew foremen as probably not very popular with their Israelites are the ones who are getting all the perks. They're put in charge. We also see that foreign slaves are used in agricultural work, which is also mentioned in the Exodus story. We even have a document that 2 agriculture slaves fled because an overseer beat them so severely that they got out of there. So, and also, if you look at Egyptian monuments and stuff, they're always showing Pharaoh holding a rod beating slaves. Like, it's very common in their tombs and artwork. They want to show that they're better than their slaves, that they're the master. You're beneath them, right? Egyptians are very racist. They think they're the best and everyone else is a lesser group. Also, what we see is after the New Kingdom period, the population of Canaanites and Semites in Egypt lowered drastically. They went somewhere, right? The archaeological record doesn't tell us where they went. They just tell us they left for some reason. Bible tells us where they went, but, this is what archaeology will say. So, that brings us to the second book of Moses, which is the Hebrew name Semot, which means names. The Hebrews just call the book of Torah by the first word in each book. So it's names for Exodus, but in the Greek Septuagint, it's called Exodus, which means a way out, and that gets Latinized as Exodus, which we still call it today. So again, we have the story in Genesis where a Hebrew family is isodos into the land. They went a way into the land, right? I'm making a pun here, I'm sorry. They dwelt there for 400 years, right? The book of Genesis is all about how they got there, how God promised that they would come out. But they've been living in Exodus. Probably most of that time was actually not bad for them, right? They were doing their herding, they were farming, they were kind of being left alone up until we get to the oppression time. Again, God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob every time he reiterated the covenant with each of the patriarchs. And now it is time for him to fulfill that covenant because the Israelites are suffering. Yet they have not actually asked God to deliver them. God remembers all on his own, as the text says in Exodus 2:24. So, who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus? We don't know. There's a lot of guesses. I'm going to give my hypothesis today, but we don't know. It's not recorded. It was very common in this time not to record the name of Pharaoh, just to call him Pharaoh. So Moses is probably using the practice of the Egyptian court of his day. So it is believed again that Joseph served under one of the Hyksos or foreign pharaohs. But by the time of the Exodus, again, native Egyptians have regained control of their country. So it's not surprising they don't like the foreign people that once oppressed them. And the Israelites are a representative of that people, right? And they were called Hebrews. Hebrews kind of just means foreigner or like sojourner or wanderer. Often, the only time you ever see Israelites called Hebrews, it's either by foreign people or when they're dealing with foreign people, they're called Hebrews. You don't actually see it. 6 is based on 1 Kings 6:1. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So Solomon's building the temple, and the text tells us that was 480 years after the Exodus. 976 BC is the generally agreed upon date that's of Solomon's 4th year. There's a lot of math that goes into that. There's some wiggle room on that date, but it's like years, not decades. So you add 480, you get 1456. It really seemed pretty straightforward, right? But the problem is Exodus 1:11, where it says, "Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses." And it's that second city, Ramses, that is the problem. So we have to be honest, right? We have the Bible saying they built store cities for Ramses. There was the second great in victory, which is abbreviated as Ramses in the Hebrew Bible. So we have the Hebrew Bible telling us one of the cities. It's a city built in the 13th century. The city is located at modern Tel El Dab in the Delta and is near the ancient city of Hatwarat or Avaris. And this was the old Hyksos capital. That's just probably where Joseph would have been residing in the Genesis account. So P-Ramses, or Ramses as it's called in the Bible, was also abandoned around 1130 and torn down to build a new capital at Tanis. This is why I brought up Tanis. So the city of Ramses at most existed from 1279 to 1130 BC, which puts it out of the window of the 1456 date. So how do we reconcile this? That's the question. So is 480 years a literal number, is what we must ask ourselves. Because it is 12 times 40, which is a important theological numbers in the Bible, right? 12 tribes of Israel. 40 is a period of time, 40 years wandering in the desert, right? There's actually a bunch of 40 years throughout the Old Testament. This will be 12 full generations, so 20 years for one group to grow up and 20 years for their children. And if we take that date of 12 generations, a generation is considered about 22 to 25 years. We plug in that date, and that gets us a date in 1264 to 1276 BC, which gives us a date at a time when the city Ramses is being built. So it gives us the 1250 date for the Exodus. Further, 1 Chronicles 6, 3 through 8 records there are 10 high priests from Aaron to Zadok, who is Solomon's high priest. And 12 generations fits that biblical data too. So it's 480 years, the literal date, or is it a symbolic number? The ancient people loved symbolic numbers, especially for temple dedications. We see in the ancient Near East they would use theologically significant numbers to their culture when they were dedicating their temple in reference to some important event to the people. And Exodus, of course, a very important event to the Israelites. So, further, after the end of the Hyksos rule in 1540 BC, there were no pharaohs reigning in the Delta until 1320 BC under Horemhab, and he was the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. And he restored Avaris to be his capital. So why were they not ruling up in the Delta? Well, the Hyksos were ruling up there, and there actually were Egyptian kings in the lower country around Memphis, and they were subject kings, so they were vassal kings to the Hyksos. And so when the Hyksos were driven out, they still stayed down at their homes down in the south. But eventually, Horemheb was like, it's nicer up in the Delta. It's cooler, you have more shade, right? So he decided to build his capital up there. So it probably would have been around this time that Israelites would be oppressed into grand building projects in the Delta that would have continued under Sethos I and Ramses II. So depending on which date you want to take of the Exodus to Pharaoh, the Exodus generally Tutmosis III, the early date, or Ramses II, the late date. And both of them lost their firstborn sons. Actually, Ramses II lost a lot of sons. He's like, I think, one of the longest reigning pharaohs of Egypt. He reigned like 80 years. He had a huge reign. So he lost a lot of kids. So, also Pithom is another city in the Delta that archaeologists have found. It is the Egyptian site of Pir Aton, which is the house of the god Atum. That's the sun god that Tutankhamun's father tried to make all of Egypt worship monotheistically, and that got him deposed, and Tutankhamun killed at a young age and all that political fallout. But both of these cities, Ramses and Pithom, are in the district of Goshen, where the Israelites settled at the end of Genesis, so they're there available to build these store cities. There's some debate what store city means. It could be funeral magazines for burial sites. It could be, some translations translate more as strongholds, like they're building fortifications around the cities. I'm not really sure, but they're building stuff at those two sites. And later biblical, like Israel or Jewish writers, like the person who wrote Targum Neophiti, he was like, Ramses, what is the city? It doesn't exist. He renamed it Tanis in his Targum because he thought that must be what they're talking about. And in fact, archaeologists thought Tanis was Ramses for a very long time because all the stones in Tanis have like inscriptions that say like Pir Ramses on it. Because you write your name of your city when you build a place. And that's how when they found the archaeology remains of actual Ramses, they went, oh, it was torn down and built into Tanis. That's how we know this stuff. And that brings us to Moses. People are going to argue about Moses. Moses didn't exist. Moses' story is ridiculous, right? You're going to hear these arguments. Moses' name is widely held to be Egyptian. I hear a lot of Christians that believe this. And we do see Mose. It's a very common ending to Egyptian names, such as Amen Mose, Ta Mose, Ra Mose. That's Ramses. That's how you say Ramses in Egyptian, Ra Mose. Hor Mose, Tut Mose. It means like son of. So Ra Mose would be son of Ra. That's what Ramses' name means. But Kenneth A. Kitchen, he is a Christian Egyptologist. He disagrees that Moses' name is actually Egyptian in origin. Moses does not use the same S sound. If it was the Egyptian name, Moses should be written with the Hebrew letter Samek, but it's written with the letter Shin, which is the SH sound. If you ever heard a Jew say Moses' name, they say Moshe, because that's actually how it is in the Hebrew. I don't know how we got Moses, but we did. But Moshe is his proper name. He further argues that Moses adopted mother of the Egyptian princess named him Mashu, which means one drawn out of the water, right? And became Moshe, as he draws out, i.e., he draws his people out of slavery. So it's a little bit of a pun in the Hebrew. Isaiah 63:11 expands on that meaning of Moses' name, of him drawing out the people. And so no, Moses is not an Egyptian name. It would be really nice. People like to use that. That's an evidence, right? But it's a Hebrew name. But we do have record of adopted children by Egyptian princesses. So no, he wouldn't have been in the succession line like the Prince of Egypt movie shows him, because he's still a foreigner. But he would have been educated. He would learn Egyptian and how to write in hieratic and hieroglyphic and probably Proto-Semitic alphabet that had already been developed based off the Egyptian hieratic, and that we have inscriptions that predate Moses by 500 years. So there is the Proto-Semitic alphabet does exist at this time. We have a document from Fayum Harum, a lady writing to Sethos II, who is the grandson of Ramses II. And she said, "Useful is my Lord's action in sending me people to be taught and trained to perform this important task. For those here are grown-up children, people like those my Lord sent, able to act, able to receive my training. They are foreigners like those brought to us under Ramses II, your good forefather. And they would say, we were quite a number in the households of the notables, and could be trained to do as they were told to do." So we have record of foreigners being educated to do this sort of work. So this is not outside the realm. And we see Ramses II was doing this stuff, and that probably continued before Ramses II. I don't think Ramses II is the pharaoh whose daughter adopted Moses, because that pharaoh died before the Exodus story, right? It could have been Sethos I or Ramses I, or maybe even Horemheb. So Moses would not be out of place in this time being educated. So that's, one people say, like, how did Moses write the Torah? No one knew how to write back then, right? Well, we have no evidence outside the Bible for Moses' existence. His story fits in the New Kingdom period of Egypt. He would have been educated. He would have had the skill to write portions of the Torah. I can't say exactly how much of the Torah he wrote. There's definitely evidence of later scribes adding stuff, correcting stuff, updating the language. But there's definitely the bulk of at least the first 4 books of the Torah written by Moses. Deuteronomy is definitely Moses' speeches that he gave at the end of his life, but those were probably written down by Joshua and then further developed by the later generations of prophets. So, and again, there's also multiple times in the Torah where God instructs Moses, write this down for future generations. So we have evidence in the book itself that Moses was told to write stuff. So, lastly, what does Egypt represent in the Bible? In Genesis 13:10, we read, "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the Jordan Valley was well watered, everything like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar." This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So, Egypt is compared with Eden. It's a really nice place to go. You have fresh water. You have, the yearly floods bring rich soil, great farming, right? Egypt fed the world during the famine, right? But it comes with risk and temptation because it is also connected with Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Places of sin and violence and horrible things, right? Joseph rose to power in Egypt, but he also had to face the temptation of Potiphar's wife, right? So we see a sexual temptation. We've already got it compared to Sodom and Gomorrah. And then later, now in the Exodus, of course, comes to represent bondage and oppression. And Israel is, of course, to be the opposite of Egypt, a place of refuge and safety even for the outsider, for the foreigner, for the sojourner, right? Amos will later accuse Israel of being worse than Egypt. Egypt also represents the political and military power that seduces the kings of Israel and Judah away from trusting God in times of crisis. We see this all the time, like you trust in Egypt. Or the Assyrians also get this comparison. But like you'll see Egyptian horses. Whenever you see Egyptian horses mentioned in the Old Testament, that is a king relying on Egypt for military power. And God is not going to be happy about that. Lastly, of course, God's defeat of Egypt is seen as him defeating the chaos sea monster Rahab. So chaos monsters back then were seen as these sort of primordial entities of disorder that caused disruption, and God defeats it. And even more interesting, one day, Rahab and the nations, right, will recognize God as Lord. And that's promised in Psalms, and it's re-echoed in Hebrews this time.
I've read that Rahab, the sea monster, was something of a national symbol. Like we have the eagle as the national symbol of the United States. And you see Russia identified as a bear.
Okay.
But Rahab the sea monster was the symbol of Egypt. Have you read that?
I have not actually read that. I would not be surprised to learn that. Snakes are a symbol of Egypt. There's a snake in the crown of the Pharaoh, a winged serpent. This is why Aaron's rod turns into a snake and eats the other snakes, because he is saying, snake is your thing, my snakes are better, right? So this is that whole point. So I would not be surprised. That is what the point is, that Rahab represents Egypt, represents the Pharaoh. So yeah, it probably is a symbol of them in some fashion. Thank you, Dan. So, and also, of course, we see this eschatological hope echoed in Isaiah, that God will, of course, that all the nations will bow down to God in the end. So does anyone's translation of Exodus 1:1 start with the word "and"? We're going to actually get to the text. Isn't that exciting? Hope I didn't put you all to sleep with that background stuff.
Mine starts with now.
No one says "and"? Yeah, I figured. I'm sorry to do this. We're going to learn some Hebrew grammar today. So there is something in Hebrew grammar called the wa or vav conjunctive. It's the letter wa, and when it's placed in front of a verb, it basically means and, or and, depending on how it's marked. So here's the thing. While no English translation, I think, shows this, the first letter of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers is the wa constructive. They all begin with and, right? So Genesis 50:26 should read into Exodus 1 this way. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt, and these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household, right? So in the Hebrew, the end of Genesis flows into the beginning of Exodus, which flows into Leviticus, which flows into Numbers, and Deuteronomy is special. It doesn't begin this way. Yeah, so that's hopefully the last grammar we'll ever have to discuss. So here we go, the actual text. And these are the names of the sons of a man named Israel who came to Egypt, each with his own household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. So this is actually a chiasm of, first it goes the sons of Leah, right? Then it goes Rachel's one son, Benjamin. Joseph's already in the land, so he's not included here. Then it's Rachel's maidservant sons, and then Leah's maidservant sons. So that's just how it's kind of arranged there. So those souls issuing from Jacob's thigh numbered 70. Thigh is a euphemism for genitals in the Hebrew Bible. Joseph was already in Egypt. Joseph, along with his brother and that entire generation, died. And 70, of course, is a very important number in the Old Testament. 70 nations in Genesis 10, 70 elders in Exodus 2:24, and Numbers 11, and Ezekiel 8, and on and on. There's a lot of number. 70 is a very important number. It means a kind of a government or a nation it seems to represent. Still, the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and became extremely mighty so that the land was filled with them. You know Genesis, right? The patriarchs, what did they struggle with? Every patriarch had an issue with having children from the wife he preferred anyways. Don't have this problem in Egypt. The descendants are very fertile. In fact, it's using the same language as Genesis uses when it talks about teeming creatures swarming the world. Sort of this idea, almost insect-like, as you see, this is kind of how the Egyptians saw them, as these little verminous things that were causing them problems and growing in numbers, and we need to deal with the, Hebrew problem. So a new king who did not know Joseph came to power in Egypt. This might not mean he didn't know who Joseph was, but means he did not like Joseph because he served that Hyksos, Pharaoh, who oppressed my ancestors, and now it's my turn for some payback. He said to his advisors, "Indeed, the people, the sons of Israel, outnumber us and are more powerful. Come now, let us deal wisely with him, lest he multiply. Should war break out, he might join our enemies, fight against us, and go up from the land." It's another thing to know about the Israelites. They become slaves here in the story, but they're not criminals. They weren't sold into slavery. They were free people invited to settle in this land by the Pharaoh, and they are betrayed by the Egyptians and forced into bondage. This is an injustice. Then they put over him taskmasters to crush him with forced labor. He built store cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more they sought to crush him, and the him here being Israel, the more he multiplied and became even more prolific. With the result that the Egyptians dreaded the sons of Israel. Right? They're trying to deal with this problem. It's not working. They're still thriving. The Egyptians imposed backbreaking labor on the sons of Israel. And this word, labor, parak, it shows up again in Leviticus 25:43, and to tell Israelites, don't treat your slaves like this. Don't make them do backbreaking labor, because that's what was done to you. They embittered their lives with excruciatingly hard work involving mortar and bricks and other kinds of demanding labor out in the field, all sorts of backbreaking labor they imposed on them. So it's not just building buildings. They're working fields. They're doing whatever wants to be done. So we have 5 minutes, so we're not going to have a question. I'm sorry. Let's go to the brave midwives, all right? So the king of Egypt said to the Hebrewish-born midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the second was named Puah. And those are both Semitic names. We even have Shiphrah found in a document of Egyptian slaves called the Brooklyn Papyrus. So he said, when you, midwife, the Hebrews, look upon the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it's a girl, she shall live. There's a lot of debate what birth stool means. It actually means between two stones. It's a big question. Some think this is an abortion euphemism, that they're supposed to abort the babies using some Egyptian spell to determine the gender, which they did believe they had. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had instructed them, but let the male children live. Then the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and let the children live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Because not like the Egyptian women are the Hebrewisses, because they are lively. Before the midwife comes to them, they have given birth," right? They're saying before we can get there and, either abort the baby or convince the mother it was a stillborn, baby's alive and well, what are we supposed to do? And Pharaoh doesn't get mad at them for this. In fact, God dealt well with the midwives. The people multiplied and became very strong. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Pharaoh commanded all his advisors, "All the born sons you shall throw Nileward, but all the daughters you shall let live." And then we're going to have a discussion if it's okay to lie for the greater evil. I would say it's okay if you're doing it to protect life, right? It's the ends right here. Now a man from the tribe house of Levi went and married the daughter of Levi. It's important she's called the daughter of Levi because she's going to be contrasted with the daughter of Pharaoh. The woman conceived and birthed a son. Seeing how beautiful he was, she hid him 3 months. When she was no longer able to hide him, she got him a papyrus basket and caulked it with tar and pitch. She lowered the child into it and placed him in the marsh at the riverbank. This is the word for basket here is terapim? No, it's teba. I'm nowhere near it. Teba. This is the same word used for Noah's Ark. In fact, all this stuff is the same words used around Noah's Ark. So we're supposed to have this connection of Noah saved by an ark, Moses saved by a little ark. That's done.
You think that God was legalistically obeying the instruction of Pharaoh?
Yes, there is an irony here where she has actually thrown her son into the river, fulfilling Pharaoh's command. She didn't say anything about it. The baby couldn't be in a basket, right? So she's doing the letter of the law here. That is true. So placed him in the marsh of the riverbank, His sister positioned herself at a distance to know what might be done to him. So people argue, how is a baby supposed to survive being left adrift on a river? That doesn't make sense. His sister is actually there kind of keeping track of him. And this is the delta. It's not really fast currents here. Further, Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe by the river. She probably does this on a regular basis, and it's very possible that they let this baby go just upstream from there so it'll float down, and hopefully this princess will take mercy. This is a scheme here, right? Like, the Bible rarely tells you what a person is thinking. They show you their actions, and then you kind of have to deduce why they're doing it. So Pharaoh's daughter went out to bathe by the river. Her maidens walking on the bank of the river. She saw the basket in the middle of the marsh and sent her maid, and she took it. She opened it, and she saw him, the child, and the infant was crying. She had compassion on him and said, "From the children of the Hebrews is this." How did she know this is a Hebrew child? Maybe Moses is circumcised. He would have been circumcised on the 8th day. Egyptians only circumcised adult men who were priests, and they didn't do it the same way as the Israelite Egyptians. It was like a partial circumcision. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call for you a wet nurse from among the Hebrewisses, that she might nurse for you the child?" See, there's a plan here. So Miriam, this is Miriam. Everyone remember Miriam? Yeah. The Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." The girl went and called the mother of the child. And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages." The woman took the child and nursed him. The child reached boyhood, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became a son to her. She called his name Moses and said, "Because out of the water I drew him." And we covered this meaning. So, what do we see here at the start of Exodus? We see women saving children, the midwives. We see Moses' mother saving him. We see Moses' sister involved. We see Pharaoh's daughter. This is 5 women that are working to protect the Israelite nation. That is how this story starts out. So, does Moses' mother plan for Pharaoh's daughter to find her son? I think she does. I think that's what's really being told here, right? And further, did Pharaoh's daughter know that her new nurse was Moses' mother? You think that's sure?
Not sure.
Not sure? People like to say, oh, the princess is just an idiot. She got easily tricked. She's a compassionate woman. She saw a baby in a basket and went, "This is a Hebrew. This is like, my dad said this male child's supposed to die, but I'm not going to do that." And then this girl pops out of the bush and is like, "Hey, I know a wet nurse." What's a wet nurse? It's a woman who's lactating, who maybe just had a baby. So no, let's not think of the Pharaoh's daughter as an idiot, but as someone who saw a baby, was stirred with compassion, and saved his life, and needed a wet nurse, and like the boy's mother is perfect for it. Yes, Dan?
Under the earlier days of the Exodus, this woman is Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut ends up running all the way as the longest lived female pharaoh in all of Egyptian history. She's a very bright woman.
Yeah, but she'd also been living down in Memphis and not up in the Delta where the Hebrews are. That's kind of the problem with the late date. It's like the people in power aren't up in the Delta. So it's a nice, but she is Hatshepsut. She's one of the, she's like Tutmosis, the 3rd daughter, or someone's daughter.
She's the daughter of one of the 3 Tutmosis.
Okay. Well, do you have a question?
No, I just had a statement. When you were talking about her looking for a wet nurse, it was already known throughout the land that the Israelite women had babies quickly and they
Yeah.
flourished. So she didn't, I mean, she could have thought maybe it is the baby's mom, but there are so many babies being born anyway.
It is coincidence that immediately this Hebrew girl pops out of the bush and be like, "Hey, I know a wet nurse."
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Any other comments before we wrap up with a prayer?
I feel it was definitely planned. You know, if you put a baby in the down, just like let him,
Yeah.
on his own, he probably would have been found and drowned.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure his mom nursed him, made sure he was all comfortable and safe, and he was quiet.
Yeah, and then she had his sister keeping tabs on him. Yeah. Any other comments? Dan's about to cut me off, so. Okay, let's have a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time to study the book of Exodus, understand the meaning of the book, to see how you never forget your promises, but you always deliver on them, and that if we just put our faith in you, you will deliver us out of bondage too, Lord. Just thank you for that, Lord, and just let that message reside in our hearts as we go out into the world. In your name, amen.